What a bully! Scott Arfield! He's been threatening that recently, and all the Burnley players run to the Darwin end.
Burnley win the next ball. It's Rory now. On the outside, decent.
Barnes! He got it! Ashley Barnes with it! What a cross from Rory! And there was Ashley Barnes! And Burnley leading the derby.
Knocks it quickly. Finds Benson in space at the byline. Can Burnley get a goal here? Back for Brownell. Saved by the keeper.
Burnley won it to the end! That is magnificent! They deserve that!
On it by Paul Patella. Off for a hat-trick.
He's got it! Hat-trick for Nathan Teller! Oh, he's on fire at the minute! 3-0 Burnley! It's Nathan Teller's day!
And Burnley are 3 up here. Fantastic derby. Here's Benson. Can he go on the outside? Comes inside. He's having a shot.
Oh, what a goal! Manuel Benson once more! That is top class!
Burnley have done it. Fantastic. Clarence deserve the championship title. They've been the best side throughout the campaign. Burnley have won the second tier. What a fantastic achievement. The players have been magnificent.
Yes, hello everybody and welcome along to the latest episode of the Turfcast podcast pre-game show with me, Joe Redmond, ahead of this weekend's what feels like a crunch match already against Bournemouth down at the bottom end of the Premier League. Now, I'm never, ever going to say that there's a must-win game in October because there's no such thing. However, I don't think it could get as close as this for the Clarets. But I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by John, and John is from the Cherries Red Army YouTube and podcast. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks very much for having me on. And yeah, I agree with you. If there was such a thing as a 6-pointer this early on, or a must-win game, this certainly is it.
Yeah, we both really need to kick on. Ideally, just us, obviously, from my perspective. But yeah, both of us are desperate for the points. But before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that for the 23-24 season, the Turfcast podcast pre-game show is, of course, sponsored by Green King Sport, where football is more than a game. It's a massive fortnight of sport currently with the Premier League, rugby, and cricket all taking centre stage. And to celebrate, Green King is giving listeners of this podcast 20% off drinks until the 29th of October. An hour before, during, and after the sport. All you need to do is download the Green King Sport app if you've not downloaded it before. You'll even get a free welcome pint. So head down to the App Store, download the Green King Sport app, get 20% off your round, and don't miss a minute of the action. That's if you want to watch the rugby, because of course England are now out, and that's if you want to watch the cricket, which I am more partial to, which of course England are suddenly dreadful at, despite being the world champions, which is infuriating. But talking of infuriating, let's talk about Burnley and Bournemouth, because obviously Burnley were infuriating last time out against Brentford. And as viewers of the channel will well know, I decided that would be my first away game of the season. I was tempted by Bournemouth, but that Brentford game immediately put me off. And I'm like, nope, I'll just get some trick-or-treating done. Yeah, John, talk to me about Bournemouth then, because as I've said, Burnley are infuriating at the minute to watch, giving away a lot of the ball and losing a lot of games. But there's not many teams that have started worse than Burnley, but Bournemouth is one of them. So talk to me about your season so far.
Where do you want to start?
I know the feeling.
Yeah, well, I suppose from the beginning it would be the fact that we've obviously got a new manager. We parted ways with Gary O'Neill before the start of pre-season. And within a few days of getting rid of Gary O'Neill, we brought in Andoni Iraola, who is the first non-British born manager in our over 100-year history. So we've gone continental for the first time ever. And there was a decent lot of backlash from basically every fan base outside of Bournemouth fans. I guess.
Yeah, I think I tweeted about it. I'll be honest. I think I tweeted about it as well.
Yeah, and I think it was one of the rare things where you'd see basically the entire Bournemouth fan base. I think was relatively united in the whole kind of, thank you, Gary, but we don't think you're the guy that's going to take us on from this point on. And I think the phrase that I've heard a couple of times recently for the idea of what Bournemouth, the ownership of Bournemouth, who are a relatively recent ownership group to take over the club, is the idea of following models like Brighton. thrive, not survive. And Gary O'Neill is a survive manager. There's no doubt about that. You can see what he's doing with Wolves. A lot of Wolves fans were not happy with him for a while up until they managed to score 2 goals against Man City with 1 shot on target. So, and then they obviously beat us recently. But Bournemouth have had a promising pre-season, a very good transfer window. I would say it was one of the best transfer windows in the league when you just look at filling in holes that were desperately needed improvement in. But the massive area that we definitely didn't unfortunately settle on, as we should have done, was a replacement for Jefferson Lerma, which has massively cost us. Jefferson Lerma, who's now at Palace, and although he's injured at the moment, is still a very popular figure at Bournemouth. As a proper ball-winning DM, the guy that held us together for long periods of the last 5 years. Brought in Tyler Adams, who would be an upgrade as far as I'm concerned, but has been injured since coming in. Played 20 minutes against Stoke in the second or third round, can't remember which one, of the Carabao Cup, the most recent round of the Carabao Cup. And not long after that was out again with a recurrence of a hamstring injury, which he's needed surgery on and won't be back until about February. So after a very tough start to the season, just behind Newcastle, the hardest first 6 figures, and I'd say probably the hardest first 8 figures of the season, when I didn't expect us to get a win, and we didn't, but we got absolutely destroyed by Arsenal at the end of that period. 4-0 was not really flattering to either side in that regard. It was a completely fair scoreline. We then go to our first game where you would expect that we have a decent chance of winning, away to Everton, and we just don't compete. Again, we lose 3-0. It wasn't good. And now, most recent game, at home to Wolves, the real tester. And we go in halftime 1-0 up. The first time this season that we've been winning at halftime. And with, not for the first time, conceding within a couple of minutes of the restart. Lewis Cook loses his head and headbutts Hwang and gets sent off. And then when we actually defend really well for a 1-1 draw with a minute of normal time to go, our keeper makes a ridiculous decision to play out from the back quickly, and we lose the ball and concede right away. So there's been a period of adjustment where we feel as though this team, are they able to actually adapt to the manager's style? We're actually, Bournemouth and Burnley are actually in quite a similar position from, I would say, a lot from an outsider's perspective, and they're trying to stick to a philosophy that is just not working at the moment. And the managers are being very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? They just want to stick to that style, and it's whether it's all they know, or whether it's just the players aren't capable of doing it, whether they're not willing to adapt, they're struggling to get goals and stop goals going in their own net. And whilst most fans for a long period were not blaming Iraola at all, because we understood the difficulty of the games and the period of adjustment, the Arsenal and Everton fans the Arsenal Everton game started getting fans to turn a little bit. And that defeat against Wolves has seen a number of fans reach the point where they think they're convinced it's not going to work under this guy. So we're at a very big tipping point at the moment. And this game could decide the manager's fate. As much as I don't think it should, I think there's a chance that it could.
So you said there you don't think it should. Say if we go to the Vitality and turn you over 4-0. It's not going to happen. Just don't worry about that. Would you still be like, no, give him a chance. Give him longer? Because that would be, 9 games, no wins. And like you said, that there's been, outside looking in, like there might be little spells of play that I've not seen, but outside looking in, obviously eyes are only focused on things that hit the news from my perspective. And obviously that Wolves goal, 1-1, last minute, you're down to 10 men, they've got a man advantage. It's just ridiculous decision making, and people can blame the player, but it's probably that in the player's head, the manager wants me to do this, the manager wants me to do this. So my worry with you as a fan of a club down there is I think you will pull away from it if you change a manager personally, but you obviously know more about Bournemouth than me. So say, for example, in that hypothetical situation, we turn you over on Saturday, would you still stick by the manager?
Here's the thing, is that at the moment, Iraola doesn't have his assistant. The only coaching staff that were brought across with him was his fitness coach, and whilst it was planned to also bring his assistant manager in, he has failed to get his work permit. And what he's currently got as part of his backroom staff is his one fitness coach, maybe some elements of the goalkeeping coach that's been around for a bit, or other bits and pieces. But his main 2 sort of his main two first team coaches are Bournemouth legends, is Sean Cooper and Tommy Elphick, because we often try and keep players involved in the coaching side. But they've only been first team coaches since Gary O'Neill came in. So they are about a year in first team coaching. So they're still learning. And Iraola is not only trying to teach his players, he's trying to teach his coaching staff as well. And he's doing it without his main man to help him. And I feel like the higher ups have not done enough to support him, because there's definitely going to be, it's not confirmed, but it's fairly certain that when we brought in Tyler Adams, they knew he was decently cropped, but they brought him in anyway. They didn't go for another option. And with other transfers that they brought in that have looked a bit like, we've gone heavily on wingers, and yet we've only got one left back in the team.
Mate, that's exactly the same as us, actually.
So I think that the reason that Iraola may get the sack if we were to lose against Burnley, if it was to be a demoralizing result, if it was to be a 3-4-0, then I do think that his position is basically gone. And whether that would be certainly with the fan base, certainly with large swathes of the fan base, and I'd imagine the higher ups would have to make a call but the thing is that once you've already got rid of Gary O'Neill and you've made a call and said, no, we're going to go this route, we're going to go down a certain philosophy. If you get rid of that within 3 months, 3-4 months, like, what does that say about your ownership style? And if you do, who are you getting in that's going to... Are you going to bring someone to try and... that's just going to be what you want but better, which is unlikely because they're going to go to a better club? Or are you going to resort back to, I don't know, trying to bring in a firefighter, which is what Gary O'Neill was? And then... But then you've just signed a bunch of players that you want to be able to take you on. We're in a very similar position to what Southampton were in last season, I feel. Because Southampton... Obviously, they ditched Hasenhuttl not long in, but they brought in loads of young players with no experience. And we are currently vastly short of players that will, drag a team through a match. We don't have very many. We don't have very many leaders at all, but certainly not.
It's
many
mad
with
how similar the situations are at the minute. Heavy on wingers, no left back, no experience. It's mad how similar it is.
Exactly. The only difference is that we brought in our manager at the start of this season. You brought yours in a year before. But it seems, having heard a little bit about Burnley recently on the podcast I listened to as well, it does feel like we're in an incredibly similar situation. And I do feel like the only reason, regardless of whether we keep Iraola in or not, the only reason that I would still rate Bournemouth staying up, heck, even if Iraola stayed, is that we have that extra year of Premier League time. So we've got that more money that we've already spent. We've got a bigger depth of players, even if it's maybe not enough as much as we'd like. And it really could be just, for the next several months, it really could just be a dogfight down there between ourselves, you, Sheffield United, and Luton, because most of the rest of the teams I see pulling away at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I was hopeful. I've got nothing against Wolves, but I was hopeful Wolves would be down there at some point. But looking at some of their results recently, I think they'll pull away. Everton, now that one's interesting. Without this 12-point deduction, I think they're safe. I think they'll have enough to stay away from it. But if it happens, I don't think it will. But if it happens, then they could be down there, and it's just a case of finishing above 2, and then we could both stop up. Because at the minute, I do think it's 3 of 4, and it's us 2, and obviously the other 2 promoted sides. Not to go heavy on the manager situation, but you mentioned that Iraola hasn't had enough help, you think, from the board and stuff like that. Do you think it's a problem with his philosophy as to why it currently isn't working? It may well do if he gets a chance. Is it an issue with his philosophy in the league, or do you think it's the right manager at the wrong time, or just doesn't fit the club?
No, I think it could. I think your second point there is probably the right one. Is the right manager at the wrong time? Because I think that I think Bournemouth went a decade with an incredibly attacking and very idealized style under Eddie Howe. The entire club was built around Eddie Howe, really. The higher ups just basically followed what he wanted. He had the roam of pretty much every aspect of the club. But after that, we went through Jason Tindall very briefly, but Jonathan Woodgate, Scott Parker, Gary O'Neill. Every single one of them has been basically incredibly defense first. And so we've got we feel as that a number of fans sort of feel like it's a little bit in-baked in the players that they have quite a defense first idea, and that this pressing style is, if you don't get it right, if you want to high press everyone, it's footballing suicide. If you're not really on it, and every single player is well and truly sticking to their system. Because if you pack, well, I mean, heck, Burnley, as Burnley fans, you're probably well aware, you can spend every game incredibly packed deep with a 4-4-2 bank, and a couple of players might not necessarily be on their game, but it doesn't matter. You've crowded the box so much, no one's got any space, and they're not going to score. So it makes it very painful to watch at times, but it is quite a solid strategy to keep you up every season. And I feel that was O'Neill's plan for a lot of the time, but he had a lot of pace on the counter and we made it work. Whereas when you're pressing very high, you only need one person to be just a little bit off in the timing of a press, and your entire front six is broken. And you're now worrying about a 6-on-4 attack or something ridiculous like that, which happened a lot against the likes of Arsenal. So it's, when you look at what Iraola did at Rayo Vallecano, he had a whole season in the Segunda division to basically build up the principles in a much more easy league to deal with. And heck, they didn't even get up automatically. They got through the playoffs. So I think they finished 6th. So they weren't outstanding in that season. But once they got to La Liga, everyone knew their jobs. And they were able to sort of surprise people in that regard. Whereas for us, it's like, I mean, he's a student of Bielsa, and you know that Bielsa ball historically takes like several months to get you sorted in what you need in terms of athleticism and the timing of your moves. And this just feels like it's a bunch of players that are struggling to put into practice the manager's philosophy and the manager's ideas. And like I said, part of that is because he doesn't have one of the guys that would help him do that in his assistant manager. But if we'd done this when we were in the Championship and had got Iraola instead of Parker, then I think we're talking about a completely different situation. So I think it would be a very good manager, just in the wrong time, and maybe with a different set of players, maybe in a team even. I don't know, if you went in at, say, Brentford, or if you went in at Brighton, heck, even like Crystal Palace, like a mid-table team. He's definitely got more to sit back on. He's got more. He's got a little bit more ability and flexibility in the players, I feel. So it's a bit of a struggle at the moment. And if we got one result at some point, if we got one win somewhere along those first 9 games, because we late equaliser against Brentford, we drew 2-2. We had a save, I don't know how, Sanchez made when we drew 0-0 against Chelsea. Any small, just marginal game where we get a win somewhere along the first 8 games, I think the attitude in the squad is so different. But when you go this long without a win, heck, if we don't beat yourselves, I think we'll be about half a year without a win in the Premier League, because we lost our last 4 games at the end of last season, and now we've won 9, would be 10 without a win here. So it's, you just need something to get the players fully on board. And while I feel as though they're committed and they're trying their best, they're just like, there must be doubts at this point after all those games.
Yeah, I feel like we're in that situation and was in that situation because obviously our game against Luton was moved because Luton Stadium wasn't ready. We have since played that match and, of course, won that match. That was the only game we've won this season. But if that game had been earlier on, all these meltdowns that we were having earlier on in the season, I don't think that there would have been. Potentially now the meltdowns would have been stronger because we'd have been longer without a win, because the meltdowns are getting stronger again now, which happens to the best fan bases, but it's happening quite regularly now with us. It wasn't a fun place to be. It was a Twitter Clouds hashtag on Saturday evening and Sunday. But just quickly before I move on to your thoughts on Burnley and predictions and stuff for the match. I just want to talk to you about some of the injuries you've got. I know you've touched on them briefly. So Tyler Adams, obviously, you've talked about a lot. Ryan Fredericks and Lewis Cook injured as well. You mentioned that. Is there anyone else that I need to be aware of that's missing?
Well, Lewis Cook will be suspended for 3 games because he got the red card. So he'll be out for a bit. Let's see other injuries. Ryan Fredericks isn't really a miss because we've got other options at fullback. Yeah, Tyler Adams is the main one. Alex Scott has since come back. And I'm trying to think. I don't think we've got really any other first teamers out at the moment, as far as I can think off the top of my head. I don't know whether anything else came up there, but no, it's that Cook suspension is with the Cook suspension and Tyler Adams out with like even someone that kind of does a decent job at number 6 in Lewis Cook, he's out. So it's like
he's a big miss.
He's a bigger miss because Tyler Adams is out. So that leaves us with basically 2 options to fill that spot. Is Joe Rothwell, who is fine as a 6. He's just not got the defensive numbers that matches Lewis Cook's. Certainly not interceptions wise, and he's much more of an attacking player anyway. I don't really want him to be the 6. He's not got the defensive awareness. Or we put in a centre back that we kind of trialed there a bit in pre-season, Marcos Senesi, who's got all the tools, I think, to be a decent 6, but he's not really played there. So he's going to miss a lot of the defensive awareness that you need when you've got to worry about 360 degrees as opposed to just what's in front of you as a centre-back. And Alex Scott, who I really liked in his one appearance so far, at the same time, you can look and see like he wasn't necessarily on it defensively either. So I'm like, our midfield is not doing enough to prevent goals, to prevent shots at all, to help the defense and prevent shots. We're conceding some of the most shots in the league, and that's mostly because our midfield is just not defensively solid enough. And to lose Lewis Cook for 3 games, it just makes it even worse. So that's the big area we're suffering at the moment.
Again, it's mad how similar that sounds. I'm just quickly getting the Premier League up so I can tell you how many shots we conceded against Brentford, because it was quite a lot. Just quickly getting the stats up. We conceded 23 shots against Brentford. It's just scandalous. It's a similar thing. It's because the midfield's not protecting the defence, because they're pushing forward too much. The gaps are there, and then they're not pressing well enough. And as you said earlier, you can get picked off quite easily. Which leads me on nicely to my next question, because we did that so well last season in the Championship. And of course, the Premier League's a different animal. We know it is. We spent 8 of the last 10 years here anyway. So we are aware of it. But what have you thought on your thoughts on Burnley in the current situation? Not the situation in the Prem, but what the club has tried to do, because it's quite interesting, I find. And obviously I'm going to find it interesting. It's my club. But when you look at what we've done for so long under Dyche and the style that we played, you've referenced it already. You know, your 4-4-2, banks of 4, compact. Even if a couple of players are off it, it doesn't really matter. You can watch Everton now if you want to watch that style of play. Burnley tried to do it differently, and it worked so well for a season. And I've said it before on this podcast, and I'll say it again. Last season was my favourite season following Burnley, just because of the style that we played. I would go into games and just sometimes it feels like a chore. Obviously, last season at any point did feel like a chore. We'll go into games, we'll play nice football, we'll turning teams over. I don't think there's a right way to play football, because I think that's harsh, and it will be very hypocritical of me to say that after the last 7 years. But I do think there's a more entertaining way to play football, and last season was that. Obviously, I'm not finding it as entertaining this year. But what are your thoughts on what the club have tried to do? Because they've tried to go in a different direction on the pitch, off the pitch. Obviously, bringing in Vincent Kompany. You mentioned that Areola was your first ever overseas manager. Same with Kompany. You know, we've tried to go do a different thing and try to sort of like get this Brexit football, Brexit Burnley sort of thing, like out of people's heads. So, what are your thoughts on the current Burnley?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I was like a lot of people that sort of expected Burnley to be the Brentford or the Wolves or the Leeds that came up and went and just sort of like, no, you're not going to survive. You're going to be like 12th, 13th. Heck, you could push for a top half finish, because look at what they did in the Championship. And historically, certainly in relatively recent history, the teams that it doesn't even need to be the team necessarily that wins, because heck, Brentford went up through the playoffs and they ended up thriving pretty quickly. But certainly the teams that absolutely smash it in the Championship and win normally then keep going when they hit the Premier League. I mean, heck, even Fulham last season, they were the ones that won the Championship that year, and they came up and they surprised everyone, admittedly with a couple of great signings in there, more than a couple of great signings, but Paulinho obviously in particular, and sticking with Mitrovic, who was always going to be a fantastic hit for them. The difference that I feel most was the thing that I think maybe, again, incredibly similar to us at Bournemouth, is just the overturn of players. And that, I mentioned back to Southampton again. It's when Bournemouth came up and just about survived last season, I felt as though, because there were so many players in that team that had survived under Eddie Howe previously, and there was a lot of camaraderie in the group, and there was, regardless of the manager, you felt that there was some sort of collective strength in the team. And Bournemouth have lost that a little bit recently, particularly with Jefferson Lerma going. That was the main one, but we've lost a couple of other players that you feel like just you're missing the older heads a little bit. And with Burnley, obviously there were a lot of transfers in, but unlike, say, Forest, which obviously was mental when they came up and did it, Forest's plan was quite scattergun. They had players in every single position of all ages, from old to young, whereas both of our clubs have gone all in on youngsters.
Yeah.
And at this point, suddenly what went from this effervescent style that, blew teams away in the Championship, Burnley now don't have anything to settle back on of the experience of the structure of their last attempt at the Premier League, because they've absolutely refreshed the squad so much that you've now not got a plan B, which admittedly would set you back more Brexit ball style and the Dyche. But it's that bit that you sort of go, it doesn't matter if it's not quite clicking yet going forward, because we've got it at the back, and neither of us do at the moment. And I do feel like maybe it is just sort of that desire to be so progressive with your signings has sort of meant that there's been a weakness that neither of us saw in our recruitment that's shown up, and it's costing us at the moment.
Yeah, definitely agree with that one. Moving on to the match then, what sort of game are you expecting? Leave the predictions off for now. We'll get into that in a separate part. But personally, I think it's going to be a game. It could end up being like high scoring, not because it's entertaining and two free-flowing teams like I expected at Brentford. It was one free-flowing team when it wasn't us. But sort of like a lot of goals in it because nobody can defend. We've got a lot of injuries to key players. You've got injuries to key players and suspensions as well. Obviously, Connor Roberts will be suspended as well for us, so he's missing. So Vitinho will have to play there probably. Or knowing Vincent Kompany, he'll shove Charlie Taylor there and put Vitinho, because he's been making some strange decisions, I think. But yeah, what sort of style of game are you expecting? Because like I said, I do think it might look free flowing, but I think there'll be a lot of goals in it because of how bad the defenses and the midfields are.
Yeah, I think it is that, because of the lack of control for either midfield, could see this turn into a basketball game for most of the match. And I do think that it could well be just a game of which team is going to score more. It's just like it just can one of these teams win it 4-3 sort of thing, because it really does feel that way at the moment. And I think that's probably, given certainly from my perspective, given our current defensive issues and midfield issues in particular, I do feel we should just be going, absolutely full throttle, just try and score. Doesn't matter how many you can see, just keep going for the goal, and just keep pushing on as much as you can to keep scoring. Because like you've mentioned, we've scored 6, you've scored 7, we've conceded 20, you've conceded 23. It's not good from either perspective. But at least I do look at some of the attacking that we've been doing and think we could definitely score a couple here at least. So yeah, I fully expect a basketball game on this one. Yeah,
I agree. My worry is Solanke. He's so good, isn't he? And he has been scoring goals even now in this. I wouldn't say a poor Bournemouth side. I think that's a bit harsh. You have started poorly, but who knows? You could click on. But again, Lal Foster scoring goals in a poor Bournemouth side, or not to be harsh, a side that started poorly. So that is a worry of mine. I remember the Brentford fan that came on last week. He said, "We're creating a lot of chances. We're just not putting it in the net." And obviously, they created even more chances against us and put them in the net. One thing that is guaranteed is you'll score a goal from 30 yards, because everybody does it against us this season because the midfield just says, have a shot, why don't you? So at least you can guarantee that one. But let's get into predictions then. As I said, I'm expecting goals because of two poor defences, and I am nothing more than blind faith, but I'm going to predict a draw just because nothing more than blind faith. I've not seen anything to suggest that we might get a draw in the last few weeks. But, it's teams in and around us and a team that hasn't won yet this season, and we've shown that we can win games in the Prem this season. Obviously, Bournemouth might still have the niggle in the back of the head that they haven't won yet this season. So who knows? I think it can go either way. It's one of them games, but I'm going to sit on the fence, get some splinters, and just say 2-2.
That's an interesting call, actually. In our last 10 fixtures, there hasn't been a single draw between Bournemouth and Burnley. It's been 3 wins to us, 7 wins to you. But that was obviously under Dyche and Howe for the vast majority of those. So, yeah, I'm normally quite pessimistic when it comes to Bournemouth, but I just feel as though this is just like there's no other option but to go for the win on this one, just to go all out for it. You can't be at home against another team that's down right next to you, having a very similar struggling season, and not just go all out for it. And I do feel as though we'll concede probably at least a couple of goals as a result. But I think that, as you mentioned, Solanke on form. I think with Billing playing as the 10 more often, might see Alex Scott, whether he starts or comes on later. I think he's been good to see, and we've got enough going forward to score at least a couple, I think. So I'm going to go for a 3-2 win.
Well, it'll be entertaining, if anything. I'm not too far. You won't be too far wrong. Like I said, I'm expecting goals. I predicted 2-2 last week as well, down at Brentford. So if my form is similar to that, then you'll obviously be having a comfortable win. But just before we wrap up, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you and your podcast and your YouTube channel if anyone want to text in any Bournemouth content after the match or before the match?
Yeah, we're at Cherries Red Army on YouTube. We're also on Twitter and Instagram. Our weekly Cherries in Focus show is also on Spotify as well, or podcast platforms, I believe. But yeah, we do a weekly show just focusing on how Bournemouth have been and looking ahead to the next game. And we do odd one-off content as well. The most recent one was Kirk, who runs the channel, was speaking to an ex-Bournemouth journalist about our current plight, which I haven't caught yet, but I do plan on watching this evening, but which should be a good watch. But yeah, Cherries Red Army on most platforms.
Yeah, well, cheers for that, John. Appreciate you coming on. Obviously, I only managed to ask you yesterday, so it's all. I'm very unprepared. Everybody I ask is like the day before, so I should really start planning ahead. Because sometimes I'm on podcasts and they'll send me a message like 2 weeks before. And I was like, "Can you do this in 2 weeks?" I'm like, "Yeah, but remind me because I will forget." So I should be more prepared. But thanks for coming on, mate. I appreciate it. Good luck for the season, but of course after Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. Same to you as well.
Cheers, mate.